It's pretty sobering when you think about it. South Asia facing such intense climate change impacts. The IPCC AR5 report really highlighted that.
It did. And for Pakistan, already juggling complex energy needs, it's a major challenge,
Definitely.
which is exactly why this study, Renewable Energy in Pakistan, paving the way towards a fully renewables-based energy system across the power, heat, transport, and desalination sectors by 2050 is so interesting.
Right.
So in this deep dive, we'll dive into what it found. It uses this detailed energy system model
Okay.
to see if, 100% renewable system across all the big sectors in Pakistan is actually feasible.
And the key finding.
Well, the study argues it's not just like a nice idea. It says going fully renewable is possible. It can
That
even save money and boost energy security. Pretty compelling stuff.
across power, heat, transport, and desalination too. That's incredible ambitious.
It is a huge scope.
Because looking at Pakistan's current setup, that figure one in the study from 2018, wow, lots of gas, coal, hydro, nuclear, renewables are just a tiny slice.
Exactly. It really shows what a massive shift they're talking about.
It makes you wonder about sustainability, energy independence, all of that.
Absolutely. And the study's authors, they really try to tackle that head on. They modeled a transition towards an energy system that's, zero GHG emissions,
All right, zero climate changing gases.
but also self-sufficient and cost-effective, aligning with things like the Paris Agreement, the UN goals.
So for you listening, the mission here is to figure out how Pakistan, with these big energy and water issues, could potentially make this massive change using renewables.
That's the core question, yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into that 2050 vision. What's the big headline from this study?
The headline, it's pretty striking. They conclude a 100% renewable energy system covering power, heat, transport, and desalination is technically possible and, importantly, economically viable for Pakistan by 2050.
Wow, okay. So which renewable source is doing the heavy lifting in this picture? I'm guessing solar, given the geography.
You got it. Solar PV is the absolute powerhouse. The projection is solar meeting a staggering 92% of all primary energy demand by 2050.
92%.
Yeah, and it's not just sunshine, it's the cost. Solar PV costs have just plummeted. This study even sees the overall cost of energy from this renewable system being lower than sticking with fossil fuels, like 56 euros per megawatt hour versus over 70 for fossil fuels. That's a big deal economically.
That is compelling. But the study also mentioned energy demand itself is going up quite a bit, especially for desalination.
Yes, that's crucial. Water desalination demand is forecast to shoot up, maybe hitting almost 19% of total final energy use.
19%, that's huge.
It is. They note it'd be among the highest shares anywhere, really underlining that energy-water connection for Pakistan.
So how does all this renewable electricity, mostly solar, power everything? Is it all just direct grid connections?
It's a mix. The study talks a lot about direct and indirect electrification.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Well, direct is like, charging your electric car straight from the grid. Indirect is using renewable electricity to make other clean fuels, maybe hydrogen or synthetic fuels.
Ah, for things harder to plug in, like planes.
Exactly. So by using renewable electricity directly where possible and making these clean fuels for other areas, the whole system gets way more efficient. And that's how they see getting to zero GHG emissions by 2050.
Okay, that's the future vision. But let's ground ourselves a bit. What's the starting point? What does Pakistan's energy sector look like now, or at least around the time of the study's baseline?
Right, so back to that Figure 1 snapshot from 2018. At that point, Pakistan's own energy authority had goals like cutting fossil fuel imports, boosting renewables, diversifying sources, trying to move in the right direction.
And were renewables already starting to look good financially back then?
Seems like it.
Yeah.
The study indicates that around 2018-2019, wind and solar PV electricity were already cost competitive with new thermal or hydro plants. Yeah, and everyone expected those renewable costs to keep falling. They mentioned solar costs around $70 per megawatt hour, then maybe dropping to 50 for big projects.
And Pakistan's location is just perfect for solar, right, in the Sun Belt.
Absolutely. This study really highlights that massive potential, especially for solar PV. Other studies that looked at wind, hydro, bioenergy too, of course. This research sort of builds on that, asking, okay, can all these renewables together meet the total demand across all these sectors?
But it hasn't all been smooth sailing for Pakistan's energy sector, has it? There have been issues.
No, definitely not. The study acknowledges the recurring crises they've faced. They've added generation capacity, sure, but getting the power where it needs to go. The transmission and distribution network has been a bottleneck.
Right.
And they mention this pretty stark fact. In 2018, over half the rural population didn't have electricity access.
Over half. Wow. So how do you fix that? How do you reach those people in this renewable future?
Well, this is where decentralized renewables DRE come in. Think local solar, maybe small grids.
Okay.
The study suggests DRE could be a really cost-effective way to get electricity to rural areas, maybe hitting universal access by 2030. It gives local control, cuts emissions, boosts efficiency. Lots of pluses.
Still going from what, about 4% renewables in their baseline data
A meager 4%, yeah.
to 100% by 2050. That's a monumental leap.
It really underscores the ambition laid out in renewable energy in Pakistan, paving the way towards a fully renewables-based energy system across the power, heat, transport, and desalination sectors by 2050. It's a huge transformation they're modeling.
Now, this study also touches on CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. That's involved a lot of energy investment, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. And this study looks at the implications, especially the new coal power plants built under CPEC.
Right.
There are concerns about, debt burden, but also the environment. Coal plants use a lot of water, and many were built in areas already stressed for water, with lots of people living nearby.
That sounds like a recipe for problems.
It could definitely worsen things. And here's a critical point this study makes. Back when those CPEC coal plants were being planned, around 2015, the cost of renewables, particularly solar, was already starting to drop fast. And now, renewables are cheaper than new coal power in Pakistan.
So investing heavily in coal then looks questionable now.
From a purely economic standpoint long term, yeah, it raises questions, especially compared to the falling cost of renewables.
Okay, but despite those CPEC coal plants, has Pakistan made official pledges to increase renewables?
Yes, they have, as part of the Paris Agreement. This study mentions the 2019 Renewable Energy Policy. The goals were, I think, 25% new renewables by 2025, 30% by 2030, plus a separate target for hydropower.
So hitting those targets would already be a significant step up.
A very big step, yeah.
And is the government doing anything to build up a local renewable industry?
They are trying. This study mentions efforts to encourage domestic manufacturing of solar panels and wind turbines using tax breaks.
That makes sense. Build local jobs, reduce import reliance.
Exactly. And that 2019 ARE policy, the alternative and renewable energy one, it supports a whole range of technologies trying to get both public and private sectors involved.
Okay, we've hit electricity pretty hard. What about the other big energy users? Heating, transport, water. How does this study see them transforming?
Right, so sector by sector. For heating, the study notes a big reliance currently on, inefficient biomass in rural areas.
Like wood burning.
Yeah, exactly. And natural gas in industry, plus more coal creeping in, especially for things like cement, not great for air quality or climate.
And transport, I imagine that's mostly road-based.
Overwhelmingly. Road transport drives that sector's GDP contribution. Demand for moving people and goods is growing. The study does mention the National Electric Vehicles Policy, which sounds quite ambitious, setting targets for EV adoption for 2030 and 2040. So there's a clear signal towards electrification there.
And water. That's obviously a huge issue for Pakistan.
Critical. This study flags that per capita water availability is worryingly close to the scarcity level. Most water goes to irrigation, but it's not used very efficiently. Here, the study sees a big role for renewable power desalination, SWRO, seawater reverse osmosis.
To provide water for farms, cities.
Exactly. Irrigation, but other sectors too.
But isn't the government also looking at building more big dams?
Yes, the water policy includes plans for large dams to store water and generate more hydropower.
Okay.
But this study also adds a note of caution about the risks, cost overruns, delays, like what happened with the Nilam Jhelum project.
Right, those big projects can be tricky.
But here's a fascinating finding from their modeling. Shifting to 100% renewables could actually cut overall water consumption by something like 95%.
95%? How?
By getting rid of conventional power plants, coal, gas, nuclear, which use enormous amounts of water for cooling. Renewables like solar and wind use hardly any.
That's incredible. A massive co-benefit. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this modeled transition. What happens to overall energy demand?
Okay, Figure 5A shows this dramatic shift. Fossil fuels, basically gone by 2050. Unsustainable biomass, gone. Electricity becomes king, like 98% of the primary energy supply.
Wow.
And Figure 5B breaks it down by sector. Heat demand actually stabilizes, surprisingly.
Why that?
Efficiency gains. Moving away from inefficient biomass burning to things like electric heat pumps makes a huge difference. But transport and desalination, they become the really big energy consumers.
So even with population growth, energy demand doesn't just explode
Well,
upwards.
figure 6a shows per person energy use does go up with development, as you'd expect.
Right.
But figure 6b is key. It shows the total primary energy needed in this highly efficient, electrified renewable system is way lower than if they just continued with current tech and efficiency levels. Electrification is just much more efficient.
Makes sense. So the power generation itself in 2050, what's the mix look like then, according to this study?
Figures 7a and 7b blow it out. It's solar PV everywhere, just dominating installed capacity and electricity production.
Really just solar. What about wind?
Wind plays a role, but it's limited. Partly because the best wind resources aren't necessarily where the demand is, maybe. Hydro and bioenergy contribute smaller bits.
Okay.
But really, the combination of super cheap solar PV and affordable battery storage. That's what the model sees as the winning combo for meeting Pakistan's future energy needs. Utility-scale solar farms are the biggest chunk, but rooftop solar PV prosumers also contribute significantly.
Right. Storage must be absolutely vital if you're relying that heavily on solar.
Totally essential.
Yeah.
As you get more and more variable renewables, you need storage. The study sees a massive build-out of batteries, both the big utility ones and batteries in homes and businesses.
Starting quite soon.
Yeah, starting around 2025 in their model. They argue it's cheaper than keeping fossil fuel plants around just for backup. Batteries provide that crucial flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
By 2050, batteries are projected to handle like 99% of the electricity storage needs. Some gas storage comes in later, maybe for handling longer seasonal gaps when solar output is lower.
Okay, the big question, cost. Does this transition break the bank?
Actually, the study argues the opposite. If you look at Table 2 and Figure 10, they project the LCOE. The levelized cost of electricity and the overall levelized cost of energy will actually decrease.
Even with all the investment needed.
Yeah. There's an initial hump, sure, you have to build all this new stuff, but the fuel is free, right? Sunshine. So the long-term operational costs are much lower than relying on imported fossil fuels.
Uh-huh.
This study calculates the final cost of energy in this 100% renewable system 2050 will be lower than the cost of the system they had in 2015, based mainly on fossil fuels. Even the cost of desalinated water drops significantly when powered by cheap renewables.
That's remarkable. So wrapping up the sector changes.
Right. Figures 11 to 15 show it visually. Power and heat, dominated by solar PV and efficient heat pumps. Transport, big shift to EVs, plus those synthetic fuels and maybe hydrogen for harder stuff. Desalination, all running on solar-powered reverse osmosis.
And the climate impact.
Figure 16 makes it crystal clear. Zero GHG emissions across all those sectors by 2050. That's the goal achieved in the model.
And those final energy flow diagrams.
Yeah, figures 17 and 18 are cool. Figure 17 shows 2015, lots of fossil fuels, lots of energy losses. Figure 18 shows 2050, solar dominating, much more energy going directly to final use, much higher overall efficiency. It's a stark contrast.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the really key takeaways from this study. Renewable energy in Pakistan, paving the way towards a fully renewables-based energy system across the power, heat, transport, and desalination sectors by 2050.
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is pretty powerful. This study makes a strong case that a 100% renewable energy system isn't just some far-off dream for Pakistan. It's actually the low-cost option going forward.
The low-cost option.
Yeah, and the benefits are huge. Much better energy efficiency because of all the electrification, kicking the expensive imported fossil fuel habit, which means better energy security, and, of course, hitting zero greenhouse gas emissions, which is critical.
And solar PV and batteries are the absolute cornerstones of this whole thing.
Absolutely. They're the core technologies driving this modeled transition. But, and this is a big but the study stresses, while the tech and the economics look good on paper, making it happen requires real political will. You need supportive policies, regulations. You need to overcome the inertia, the existing fossil fuel subsidies, fix infrastructure issues.
So the main roadblocks aren't really about the technology or the money. It's more about politics and implementation.
That's exactly what this study concludes. The biggest challenge is political commitment to actually scale up renewables at the speed and scale needed.
Right.
And they also loop back to water, emphasizing that tackling water scarcity with renewable desalination is a really integrated part of making this whole sustainable energy future work for Pakistan.
This study, Renewable Energy in Pakistan, paving the way towards a fully renewables-based energy system across the power, heat, transport, and desalination sector by 2050, it really does paint a compelling picture.
It really does. It lays out a potential path for Pakistan towards that fully renewable system across power, heat, transport, and desalination by 2050. A future that looks more sustainable, more secure, and potentially cheaper too.
So thinking about Pakistan's big challenges, energy, water, but also its massive renewable potential, what do you think are the single biggest hurdles? Is it politics,
Hmm.
economics, social acceptance? What really needs to shift to make the vision in renewable energy in Pakistan, paving the way towards a fully renewables-based energy system across the power, heat, transport, and desalination sectors by 2050 a reality? And maybe what lessons could other countries learn from Pakistan's potential journey here? That's certainly some food for thought.